I want to start out first by saying that I'm not up here to stand on my high horse and talk about sustainability and how everybody should be doing it, and if you're not, you're a horrible person or anything like that. I know there's a spectrum. There's the side over here that says, you're not doing enough, you're not doing enough, you're never doing enough, and then there's the side over here that says, we're fighting a problem that doesn't even exist. And so there's a huge spectrum in the middle of it. So, and even if you're on the spectrum that says it's a problem that doesn't exist, why are we even having this conversation? Even going and doing sustainability things to reduce cost helps, right? So whether you're trying to save the planet or it's the cost reduction exercise, it's still valuable. And when I first came up with this, I was talking about I was so excited, and I went to Canada, and there was the Avanta event. Anybody been to an Avanta event? It's the Gartner CIO summits and those kind of things. And I went there, and I was talking about FinOps and sustainability, and I got into a room, and there were 16 people around the room, and we were talking, and I was asking these CIOs of the largest customers and the enterprises of Canada, who I thought would be all over this, didn't even care. I'm like, how many of you guys have an ESG plan or a statement? And they're like, I do. And I'm like, how many of you are on that team? Not one of them raised their hand. Not one CIO or CTO was actually on the sustainability team within their organization. And that was eye-opening for me, because I totally thought they would be all over this. I totally thought there was just a natural alignment between FinOps and sustainability, as we'll talk about. My name's Jaisson Mailoux. The easiest way to think about that is I got married about 6 years ago, second time. Second time's always a charm, right? I learned from the first one. It's like buying a house. The first one is like, oh, I thought I wanted all this. And second house, you're like, I didn't really need the patio. I know you guys are like, that sucked. But anyway, on sustainability, 7 kids. Oh, my name. So my name is Mailoux. And the way you can remember that is my second marriage, her last name was Dye. So we were the Mailoux Dye wedding. That is a true story. And we got married on Friday the 13th. I said, oh, you're the one. If you're going to marry me on Friday the 13th, you're the one. And of course, my name's Jaisson. So it's Jaisson on Friday the 13th. The Mailoux Dye wedding was great. And then I have Rishi here. And Rishi is he'll come up here towards the end. And if you have questions on unit of economics, he can help you with that. He published papers on that as well. But I want to talk about ESG. And when I was doing this, it's like, do I go deep? Do I stay at a high level because this is new to everybody? And I just started thinking, what was new to me? As I was learning this, what were the confusing things? What were the confusing acronyms? How can I apply the FinOps methodology to the sustainability initiative? How can I get sustainability KPIs included in the FinOps stuff? How can I get the sustainability included in the working group? And so that's kind of what the talk is. You can ask me the tough questions at the end when I'll get Rishi up here. So he can answer those, and I'll be the smile until then. But, the other thing I want to say is I have 7 kids. That in itself is not sustainable, right? And they're like 6'3", 6'4" football players in Texas. Like, that's not sustainable. That in itself is not. I drive a Mustang 2003 GT. That is not sustainable. I don't care if I turn off my lights at home. I think I got beat down so bad when I was young. Turn off the lights when you leave the room, that I just want to turn all the lights on all the time, just because it's my house now, right? I'm the king of this castle. So I say that just to say that, again, I'm not up here on a high horse saying I'm doing everything right, that this is what we all should do, that I'm saving the planet, but there are things that we can do. And there are things that we can do from a FinOps perspective. One of the problems that I see is, how do we in IT get business value back to the organization? We hear it all the time. But every time we talk about business value, it goes back to unit of economics. Oh, I saved the company this amount of money. I want to change the conversation a little bit from that. So the first thing I want to ask, and you guys have to talk, what is FinOps? Give me a real quick, down and dirty, what is FinOps? Somebody, anybody. Maximizing cloud spend. What else? Give me another definition. Anybody on FinOps? You guys heard it over and over and over in every presentation on FinOps. What was that? Maximizing and justifying. I say FinOps is about getting the most business value for every dollar you spend. But what is business value? Because I'm telling you right now, in IT, we're always a cost reduction team. It's always, you need to spend less, you need to spend less, you need to go 10% less, blah, blah, blah. And the reason is we don't do a good job of providing the business value back to the organization. We just traditionally don't do a good job on that. So the other thing, and somebody said it over there, is how do we maximize our current investment while optimizing spend as we consume cloud resources? It's not a cost-cutting exercise, and every time I talk to people about FinOps, even my practitioners, it always goes back to cost. And I get it, cash is king. I get it. But if we can change the conversation, if we can really start looking at FinOps as business value, and we can articulate that back to the organization, the whole conversation changes. Now we're freeing up money, we're freeing up resources. We're not always the first thing or second thing that goes, because anytime there's a downturn in the economy, what do? They start firing people, they lay off people, and then the next thing is we need to kill IT. The other thing that I think about a lot is what's the other thing that goes is training. So now we're taking these IT people that have done it on-prem forever, and we apply that logic to the cloud. That's why we have waste. Nobody wants to invest in the training. Nobody wants to send those individuals to training to understand these things. And the other thing that I'll tell you is I am an infrastructure guy. I spent 13 years at Microsoft as an escalation engineer. I spent 11 more years at Software One, and I stole their slides here, as you'll see in a second. I borrowed. They may or may not be exactly the way they were when I did them last year when I was at Software One, as we'll see. I mean, I did cover the logo, by the way. So we're at least good on that, Dan. But anyway. And then when I talk about cloud, did I go back? FinOps. When I talk about sustainability, it's big. It's big. ESG is big. We can have a whole conversation on the E. We can have a whole conversation on the S. We can have a whole conversation on the G. I have 25 minutes to talk. So I'm going to hit it at a high level and then talk about what I would recommend. And then at the end, one thing that if you ever go to a sustainability talk, if you ever go to somebody that talks about what sustainability is, if they don't tell you what they're doing at their organization, you don't need to listen to any of it. If they can't articulate the pains and the problems they had in implementing it at their organization and the lessons learned, I would say it's not even worth listening to them at that point. And we'll talk about that here in a second as well. But when I talk about ESG, we are talking about cloud sustainability, right? So we're talking about IT cloud sustainability. And so if you look at sustainability here, it's really focused on reducing the environmental impact from an IT perspective. And I'm going to walk through an example here in just a second. But what is ESG? Because for me, every time that I was doing ESG was always sustainability for S. I screwed it up every time. I still screw it up. What does the S stand for in ESG? Social. Environmental, social, governance, right? So if you look at it, I broke it down here. You have the environmental factors, and that's what we're going to talk about, the cloud aspect, the cloud digital aspect in environmental. And then you have the social, and then you have the governance. But when you talk about ESG, how do we even do the reporting? What tools can you have? How do you do the metrics? It's hard. And I'll tell you, I went to Dell Tech World. Anybody go to Dell Tech World this year in Vegas? It was awesome, by the way. If you ever get a chance to go to that one, it's my first time ever going, and they did a good job. And they had a sustainability track. And they were talking about all of these things and what environmental and social and governance and so forth. And we're going to go through the scopes, and we'll go through those things. But one thing that they do that I thought was awesome, they have a new thing called Project Luna. And Project Luna is a laptop. And the laptop is 100% componentized. They actually take it where you can take off the screen. There's no screws in the entire laptop. There's no glue in the entire laptop. So what's cool about that is when I go and I have my refresh cycle over 3 years or whatever, I can actually take the components apart, and each component had a QR code. So then they can see what the lifespan of that particular component was in the laptop. Because there's some people like me, I never plug into the jack. Never. I'm always Bluetooth. So when I go to refresh that laptop, that jack, that sound device, there's tons of lifespan still left on it. So they were able to take that out now and put it into another one. So now I can get super granular in the sustainability of it. And how does that affect us? I'll talk about that in a second. What is SDGs? Anybody know what an SDG is? Because I didn't. So if I'm going to take and I'm going to create an ESG program within my organization, what framework am I going to align that to? Well, you align it to the SDGs. And what an SDG is, it's the Sustainability Development Goals. It's 17 goals back published in 2015. We're halfway through 2023, and most people don't even know what the SDGs are. So you guys can go and you can look at the SDGs. There's 17 of them. If I was you, I would focus on 2. I would focus on 13 and 17. 13 says, take action now. 17 is, how are you doing your digital cloud sustainability aspect? So those are the 2 that I would look at, is 13 and 17 of this. But that's what I would align my ESG framework, my ESG program, my ESG policies for my organization, is based on those goals. So if we have ESG, which is kind of the overarching architect of what we're going to do internally at my organization, and I'm aligning those to the SDGs, what is a GHG? Anybody know GHG? Anybody know GHG? Because this is the important thing right here. If there's anything to take away, it's the GHG. Greenhouse gas, yes. So the greenhouse gas, internationally recognized standards. So they took the SDGs and came up with the GHG, which are 3 scopes in where all of the emissions come into play. So when you look at GHG, and I wish that this slide built, but if I just go through it all, one more, you can see there's 2 types of it. There's 2 reporting aspects of GHG that align to the SDGs for your ESG. We got that clear? All right. Now, here's the big thing. This is the important part. This is where everybody's screwing up. So when I look at ESGs, or the GHG, which is the protocols, there's 3 scopes. Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3. Scope 1 is the direct impact, the direct emissions that I have in working in my facilities and how I create things. Scope 2 is the power that I'm purchasing to do those things and those activities. And then Scope 3 is all my suppliers. Now here's what people are doing. When you have a data center, when you have your on-premise footprint, right, that's part of Scope 1 and Scope 2. It's what I create internally and the impact that I have there, and then the power source that it takes to run that. If it's external, so if I'm buying the power from a power utility company, that's Scope 2. If I have a generator, a backup, if I'm using diesel fuels, whatever, that's Scope 1. So Scope 1 is direct impact, Scope 2 is indirect impact because you're purchasing it. Scope 3 are all my suppliers. Now what I've seen is regulations coming out that say you have to show your carbon footprint for Scope 1 and Scope 2. They don't tell you how to do it. They don't tell you metrics to use. They don't tell you how to calculate it. They don't tell you any of that stuff. So what happens is, if I use Dell and HP, for example, they're calculating their carbon footprint completely different. So how do I compare the 2? So if I'm looking at sustainability, how do I compare them? Because it is important. If I look at Kyndryl alone, we had 200 RFPs last year that all had sustainability aspects to the RFP, a value of over $2 billion in the RFPs. And then in 2023, this year, they're saying, okay, well now, we traditionally didn't tell you that you had to do anything with Scope 3. It was too hard to do. Don't worry about it. But now there's proposals, even with the SEC, that you have to start calculating that, and you have to start saying that. And the reason I bring this up, and the reason this is so important, is because if you look at 2024, Germany even took it to another step. And they're even making it worse to calculate, in a requirement to calculate. But the reason I bring this is because here's what's happening. We say the cloud vendors, Azure and VMware, or not VMware, AWS and GCP, they're like, you know what? If you take your on-prem footprint and I take it and I put it to the cloud, I can reduce my carbon emissions by 98%. That's what they're saying. But the way they're doing it, a lot of it is they're using renewable energy and those kind of things, right? But you haven't really done an impact, because all you did is you took this legacy IaaS footprint and you put it up into the cloud. You haven't done anything. You kicked the can down the road. That's all you did. So it looks good from reporting of scope 1 and scope 2. But now that we have to report on scope 3, it doesn't look as attractive anymore. It is still a good step. It is better than what most people are doing on-prem. So I'm not trying to take that away from the hyperscalers. But it's not enough. And what's the value there? We know, and when you go back to the value, that there are indices now that say, are you a green company? So for investment purposes, you have to show that you're green. The other thing I took Uber the other day, and Uber says, do you want a green car? Once you start going down this path and you start looking for it, you're going to see green initiatives everywhere. You're going to see the logo everywhere. We want to buy green. Most people want to buy green. It's good for investment. It's good for cost. It's good for the environment. Most of our kids want to work for green companies. So what can IT do to help with this? That's the key. So if I look at what IT can do, let me actually show you. I've already talked to this slide, but it's how the three things, so for you guys that are taking pictures, take a picture of it because it shows how the ESG, the SDG, and the GHG go together. Because it's important to understand that flow as you guys figure out what frameworks that you want to do and what frameworks that you want to go by. By the way, and I'm going to screw up the acronym, and Dan's going to laugh at me, but for Kyndryl, we use the World Wildlife Fund's environmental footprint calculator to determine our own emissions. So that's the calculator we use at Kyndryl to determine our emissions. So if you're looking for a calculator and you want to do that, go to the whatever I just said. The other thing is, if you go to FinOps and you do a search for FinOps.org and sustainability, there's a working group. I didn't even tell you guys, I'm on the board of governors for that, and I'm in the working group for sustainability at FinOps. You can go there and there's a self-assessment. So if you even want to just start out by going and getting a self-assessment, go to FinOps, do a search for the sustainability working group, and there's a cool assessment there with tons of resources for you guys to kind of help guide you through some of the things that we're talking about here. But let's go through and see why there's a problem. And this is where I borrowed these slides, and they may not be the exact same color and the exact same animation as when I was at Software One. They may not be. But this is the iron triangle. When you're having a conversation and you're trying to talk about business value, you have to whiteboard this. Because what this is saying is, look, if you have a priority, what are you going to give up? So if your priority is cost, what are you going to give up? Am I going to give up quality, or am I going to give up speed to do cost as my priority? So when procurement comes and finance comes, because their KPIs are aligned to cost, what am I giving up? And then if quality is it, well, am I going to give up cost or speed? And again, if I'm doing speed, am I giving up cost, or am I going to give up quality? And the problem is this. The problem is that each group has different KPIs and they're not aligned. This is a fundamental problem of FinOps. Right? The engineering team, what is their KPI if I'm on the engineering team? What's the number one KPI for the engineering team in IT? Uptime and performance. So if procurement comes to me and says, on this working machine over here that's doing great, hasn't had any downtime, no blue screens, nothing, patch is fine, backup's fine, but you know what? We could probably take away 2 of those cores and half of the memory. You wonder why getting engineers to take action is such a problem? Because you're introducing risk to their KPIs. That's the problem. And then you talk to the developers, and I don't know if you guys went to Dan and Parker's SQL presentation earlier. That was awesome, because there's a difference between SQL Enterprise and SQL Standard. But if I'm a developer and mine is about innovation and mine is about low code or no errors in my code and all of that, well, I'm going to go for the bells and whistles every time. I want Enterprise Edition because I don't want to be limited in what I can do to hit and achieve my KPIs. But they didn't care about cost. They didn't care about speed. They didn't care about those things. It's not their KPI. And the reason I bring this up is because where do you think sustainability falls on this? It's nobody's KPI. There's one group in your organization that's probably their KPIs. So if they're not part of the working group, the FinOps working group, if you're not including them into the conversation, you're missing the boat. And we want to be able to use these initiatives, use those things that I'm going to talk about in a second, to show value back to the organization so they stop coming to us and say, cut costs all the time. Because now they realize the worth. Now they realize the value. Now we're able to articulate the value back to the organization. So let's walk through this slide. Again, I may or may not have stolen from that individual right there who created it. This is a slide that we used to use all the time. And basically, it's the methodology. And the methodology is, what is your compliance data layer? What's my on-prem footprint look like today? What is it going to look like in this new hybrid model? What is in Azure, am I going to do a single tenant? Am I going to do multiple tenants? Am I going to do a single subscription? How am I going to break down my business units? I mean, that's super important. Like, this is important things before we even get to the tagging strategy. How do we break it down? And then you got the technical deployment, the right sizing aspect of it. You got what I just talked about. Maybe we look at a tool to say, here's the performance, you're underutilized. We took this over-provisioned server, we threw it up into the cloud. That's a problem. Or automation. Are we using functions as a code? Or are you trying to make your engineers, who are infrastructure engineers, try to know DevOps? Because it doesn't work. I took 3 semesters of developer stuff. I went to the MIT continuous development course. I did all that. And the only thing that I learned was I don't want to code anything else for the rest of my life. I suck at coding. I'm an infrastructure guy. So when you're trying to make infrastructure guys do coding and they're using the legacy knowledge of over-provisioning those servers and put it up into the cloud, you have waste automatically. That's a really easy thing that we can do. But why are we not using functions as a service? Why are we not using infrastructure as code? How can functions as a service and infrastructure code help me with my sustainability? So just because I took my on-premise machine, I threw it up into the cloud into IaaS, we're not lowering our footprint. But if I could go to infrastructure as code, now I'm lowering my footprint. And then am I able to take that back and help the organization achieve their sustainability initiatives? Because I decided to take an IaaS machine and use infrastructure as code. That's one of the things to look at. There's other things like replatforming, hybrid use benefits. Let's walk through an example real quick. And again, I didn't even take the time to change the costing. So this cost is from like 3 years ago. I didn't even change the numbers. I probably should have changed the numbers to make it look like it wasn't Software Ones, but it is. In this example, and we'll go through it real quickly. In this example, I have a machine that's on-prem and I want to throw it up into the cloud. So I'm taking an over-provisioned machine and I'm throwing it up in the cloud, which is what most of our customers are doing. And by doing this, it's this D3 example. So on-prem, it was 4 CPUs and it was 14 gigabytes of memory. That's what we're going to give them when we put it up in the cloud. And I'll tell you, the other reason a lot of customers are doing this, the vendors support this. The vendors, if you guys go and get money, vendor-funded money to jumpstart the migration, and usually they want like a 10-to-1 return. So if they give you $1 million, they want $10 million in the next 12 months in consumption. And they also give you an artificial timeline to go and do this because it's a land grab. They want you in the cloud as fast as possible without optimization. And then they say, go optimize later. But I was walking through the cloud the other day, or the crowd right here, and a guy was talking to somebody else, and he goes, man, we moved to the cloud 10 years ago and then didn't do anything with it since. And I see it all the time. But what if we could go through this process on the previous screen? And I said, you know what? I went through and I had a tool. I looked at the performance. And you know what? I talked to the business unit. We know what the SLAs are. Maybe I went from a D3 to an A2 series. And I could get away with it. And it's supported in that model. So just doing that performance, that right sizing that we talked to, it went from $408 to $131 a month. That's a huge number. But then we can start looking at, what about reserved instance? So now if I have reserved instance, there is no reserved instance on the A series, but I could actually double my memory, and then I could go to 129. Or what if I want to do the 3-year reserved instance? I can even go further down because I know that I'm going to have this. I know this workload's going to be there for a while. But then I could say, what if I do software assurance and my hybrid use benefits? And if I do software assurance and hybrid use benefits, now I can go back to the A series, which still hits all of my SLAs, and I'm down to $87 a month. And what if I want to then combine reserved instance plus my hybrid use rights, which is a software assurance benefit? Well, now I'm down to $39 a month by going through this exercise. But is this real? Is this feasible? Does the application that this OS is supporting support that? If I have a limited amount of software assurance benefits, should I even apply it to that particular workload? And then this is just IaaS. What if I went to infrastructure as code where I could get more resilient, I can lower my carbon footprint, I can get better security, because if I'm infrastructure as code, I don't have the footprint to attack at. There is no attack surface except for when I'm doing it. And the other thing I'll say here is every hyperscaler says it's pay as you go, or pay as you consume, or pay as you use. And it's not. It's pay as you deploy, because whether you consume it or use it or anything not, you're paying for it. So what if I can eliminate the need for that? And I can say, only execute this code when needed, or only have the one machine there until needed, or use spot instances on the non-mission critical servers. Because when I do that, I'm lowering my carbon footprint. I'm lowering my power consumption. I'm providing value back and hitting the initiatives that the company has for their ESG. Now we're talking value, real value to the organization, real value to the stakeholders, real value. And it's not a cost-cutting exercise at that point. But then we can go and say, let's look at this. What was the technical optimization look like? So the technical optimization that we just went through over 3 years was $8,000. The licensing optimization was a further $5,000. So the savings for this particular server was $13,000 over 3 years. And it gets even better in years 4, 5, and 6. And it's still talking IaaS. But you don't ever do one server, you do 20 servers. So let's do 20 servers over 200, the 20 server workload was $265,000 in savings. That's numbers. And it's great that you can do this for them, but it's still a cost-cutting exercise when you look at it that way. But when you start adding the sustainability, when you start adding the security, when you start adding the value that you're bringing back to the organization, you're not a cost-cutting organization, the cost-cutting department anymore. And that's kind of what I'm hoping that you guys look at it. So I want to tell you what we're doing at Kyndryl. This isn't a service we're selling. We do have services that we're selling, both on the FinOps and sustainability, but this is what we did. So we're a new company. So Kyndryl split off from IBM 2 years ago. So 90,000 employees split off and became Kyndryl from IBM 2 years ago. That's who Kyndryl is, managed service provider. And so what did we do? The first thing we did, made an alliance with Microsoft, made an alliance with AWS, made an alliance with VMware and ServiceNow and GCP. But then we also, from day one, took sustainability as an important and a credible thing, because we know it's going to be part of our evaluation. We know it's part of our stock price. We know that that talent wants to work with sustainable companies. I had these slides to go through and show you what we were doing, that we're part of the RBA, which is the responsible business, I knew I was going to, it's responsible business something, RBA, Responsible Business Alliance. And we have those. You guys can take a screenshot. You're getting copies of the slides. You can see what we're doing. How are we going to achieve it? Now, the last thing I want to leave you with before I open it up for questions is, look, you have to be transparent. You have to say what standards you're following through. How did you get the metrics? You have to have these statements published. You cannot just be out there and say, we're doing these things. That's called greenwashing. You cannot say we have this initiative without telling the why, the how. And so you can see through this how we are doing it at Kyndryl. How are we addressing Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3? Because if you look at this, Kyndryl has 260 data centers in 54 countries. Data centers consume a lot of energy. We produce a lot of waste. This is a big initiative for Kyndryl. And it's super, super important. So if we can modernize, we can get to the infrastructure as code, we can move up the scale or up the stack in the services, we're going to have a huge impact on carbon emissions. And it's important. You can see the frameworks and all of that, but let's get to the last thing. What are the steps you guys can do? So at Kyndryl, what we did is we established the baseline. First thing we did, establish a baseline. We then educate. We have an awesome education program. You guys can go, there's tons of things that you can repurpose around this. You can set the goals and targets right, make sure that you're transparent in how you're going to achieve it and the metrics that you're using to achieve those goals. And then implement, report, evaluate, and revise. How is that not the FinOps framework? Inform, optimize, and operate. Add sustainability to your FinOps framework. Add that to your working group. Make sure it's part of the conversations and the discussions. And don't worry about having to wait for regulations to come out. It's crawl, walk, run. Get started. Go to the FinOps and the Sustainability 101 assessment that we talked about. Go to the worldwide life. I am not going to get that right. Go to that thing. Do that thing. That dude said the dude and playing the dude. Get a baseline. But be transparent. So I am the self-proclaimed best presenter at both Software One and Kyndryl, just so you guys know. I hope that you found this enjoyable. Rishi, you want to come up? So we only have like 33 seconds. Yes,
go to questions now. I think I just want to add one thing. Sustainability is just not a metric that we need to track. It is responsibility of each individual, and as an individual and a company as well. So we should be, it is just not tracking and reporting. It should be a responsibility of the individuals to achieve them. And we have talked about all of these ESG, SDGs, GHGs, and all of these are a process of reporting and tracking them. How do we achieve them? It is our own responsibility to get that achieved. So with that, I think we are open for the questions.
Yeah, we're actually out of time.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we're out of time. Definitely, we need to prep for the next one. The next session will be around GreenOps as well. So if you're interested in the topic, you can stay here, and within 10 minutes, we're getting started. But before we end off, can I give a massive round of applause for
thank you very much.
Jaisson and Rishi.
Thank you
so much.
Thanks for watching that session. I'm sitting here in San Diego right after FinOps X. We hope you join us next year here live 2024. In the meantime, please subscribe to the channel and join the community. Get involved, join the summits, get in a working group, and don't forget to get FinOps certified. Because next year here in San Diego for FinOps X, it's going to be twice as big. Come join the party. Come meet your people. Welcome home.